Well, welcome everyone. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's a beautiful day. It's fantastic that you are spending the next 45 minutes with us as we look at this whole business of climbing Kilimanjaro, which is how we talk about it, right? There's a mountain, we've got to climb this thing, and we're trying to equip ourselves to do that. So we're talking about 10,000 hours. We're talking about putting into practice. We're talking about there's so many rules and rules of the game, right? And it's all around how you implement them, how you practice, and how you get better and better and better. So we've been looking at a whole bunch of questions. You know, what do all leaders have in common? When you find a leader, there's something that they've all got. What is that? What is that thing? How did they get that good? And can you learn to be that good? What's the secret? I'll tell you what the secret is. Okay, there is a secret to it, and it's this: you need to know the rules of the game, and there are rules, and it's what we've been talking about every Tuesday and every Thursday. And then you need to practice them. You need to put them into effect, and you need to do it over and over and over until you're awesome. That's what the rule of 10,000 hours is all about. And this evening, we're talking to our very own Esther Odejimi-Uzokwe. Welcome, Esther. It's great to have you here and to be talking to you. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me. Very excited.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. No, look, we're hugely excited. And look, so here's the thing. We talk about practice and we talk about being awesome and about getting great. I seem to remember when I first met you and we talked, do you play the drums? Is that a thing? Did I hear that right?
You did. You heard that correctly. I play the drum kit. I do.
You play the drums.
Yeah,
okay. So how good are you? Are you like, on a scale of 1 to 10, like, I mean, how good are you?
Look, I back myself in this life. I'm a 50 on a scale of 1 to 10.
Okay, look, I'm loving it. So how did you get this? How did you even get into playing drums? Why would I look at you? It's not obvious to me that you'd be playing drums. Like, so how?
Yeah, I mean, it's a cool story. So both my parents, in fact, from the generation above that, but even my grandparents on both sides are in ministry, they're pastors. And my parents obviously came to this country many years ago before Esther was ever a thing with my 2 older brothers. And by virtue of the difficulties that come with being pastors in the UK and, running a church, they decided to train up all of their children to be instrumentalists in the church.
Okay.
So that's me. I play the drums, my brothers play the keys and the guitar, and we're all vocalists. So yeah, that's it.
So you've done your 10,000 hours with the drums. So literally, so your family, you guys can you can make some cool sounds when you get together.
Yeah. We're a very musical family. Started from the age of, my earliest memory actually in life ever is playing the drums at the age of 4. That's my earliest memory of life.
Okay. So that's why you backed yourself. That's why So look, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to put comments in the comments. I want you to put questions in the Q&A. We'll try and pull some out and we'll throw them over to Esther. By the way, I want you to start putting into the comments some of the things you've taken away these last however many weeks it is that we've been doing this, 5, 6, 7 weeks, whatever it is. For example, always take notes, right? Some of the things the leaders have been telling us is always write the stuff down, always write it down, always write it down. You can always go back and you can check. We were just talking just like a couple of days ago. We were just talking about it, about having, Jonathan Sorrell was saying, I have literally got like reams and reams of notebooks from the last year. I write everything down. Same thing with Rob Gardner, writes everything down. We write stuff down, people. It's a basic thing. Start putting some stuff into the chat about things that you've learned, that you're just sharing. This is what landed with me over the last 6 weeks. So Esther, I want to tell me a little bit about you've hinted at it a little bit. You came here when you weren't even a thing. Your parents came here and now you're very much a thing. And, and here you are, your program director. So, I mean, tell us a bit about your background, about your journey, school, uni, the whole piece. Just give us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'll give you a little bite-sized version of the kind of history. So I'm Nigerian by heritage. My parents were both born in Nigeria. They met in Nigeria, married in Nigeria, had both of my older brothers in Nigeria, and then moved over to this country in 1994. I was born in 1995 in Hackney, in Homerton Hospital. I'm an East London baby, born and bred.
Talking about.
And so I was born in East London, born in Hackney to be specific, raised in Romford and Ilford. And that's where my family home is based. In terms of schooling, I was state comprehensively educated my entire life. So I just went to one of the local schools. My primary school was literally 5 footsteps in front of my front door. And my secondary school was a 5-minute bus journey up the A12. So And I was at the same secondary school that both of my brothers went to. It's funny because in life, I kind of idolized everything that my older brothers did. They played basketball, I played basketball. They went to a particular high school, I went to that high school. Everything they did, I did because I idolized them. And I was a bit of a tomboy growing up as well because of that. In a very typical kind of Nigerian home, if my brothers go out, my mum forces my brothers to take me with them. So I'm a little tag along with all of my brothers' friends. So I was very much a little bit of a tomboy. Growing up, sport was a massive thing for me, basketball a massive thing for me. So yeah, rewind back to the educational side. So I stayed at the same secondary school from year 7 through to sixth form. I did my A-levels there as well. It's called Oaks Park High School, for anybody that knows. We have a very bright, ugly green blazer that makes us extremely recognizable walking down the street. So yeah, I was there for my entire educational journey. I would say in secondary school, I wasn't necessarily the best behaved. I was very confident because of the fact that I had 2 older brothers in school. So I came into year 7, everybody knew who Esther was because she had those 2 older brothers, and it was kind of like touch not, because, you know, things could go wrong.
Touch not.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of played to that, to be honest. But I think academically, like academics were always I was always strong academically, should I say, particularly in regards to where I was, like, you know, in East London, comprehensive school.
Did that just come naturally, or did you have like, did your older brother, your dad, your mom, did people help you with that, or was it just like you were just like a gifted kid? What was the story?
I think I didn't have any kind of extra help or tuition or anything like that. I think in terms of my family in general, we're very musical, and we're quite intellectual as well. So yeah, that was just one of the things that I kind of was blessed with, should I say, and kind of navigating that academic space, I wouldn't say was difficult for me until I hit A-level, and there was that jump in kind of what's required from you academically. So I hit A-level.
So what A-levels did you do? Tell us a bit about that. What did you study?
So I did English literature, biology, drama, and theatre studies, and French. So those are my A-levels. So big mix, and because I didn't know what I wanted to do in life, so I just thought to myself, take something from everywhere and diversify. So that's exactly what I did. And it's funny, I don't know whether or not you want to kind of touch on this later, but just like my journey to university as well was a very interesting one.
Tell us all about it. Let's go.
Yeah, so I went to, as I said, a state comprehensive school where, you know, progression to Russell Group and Oxbridge was not necessarily it didn't happen in high proportions. So nobody went to Oxbridge, what you're basically saying. Okay, when you say it didn't happen in high proportions, like it didn't really happen, right? Is that
Pretty much, yeah, exactly. It wasn't a thing. It wasn't a thing for us.
Yeah.
And again, going back to my Nigerian parents, education is everything for them. And my mum has a very prophetic tongue. She would always say, one of my kids will study at Oxford or Cambridge. And it just so happened that that prophecy landed on my head. And with that, I remember doing my A-levels and being at a parents' evening, my mum being sat next to me with my sixth form tutor at the time and saying, I want my daughter to go to Oxford or Cambridge. And I kind of rolled my eyes like, oh, here she comes again. It's that same narrative from every Nigerian parent.
Here we go.
Yeah, exactly. And this was a turning point for me. And I think it's why it's important for me to mention this, because my teacher looked me dead in the eye and said, no, absolutely, that's possible. And you should aspire to that.
Love that.
And that was kind of like a blink in my mind. I was like, oh, snap. Not only is this coming from my home, it's actually coming from people outside my home, whom I also have respect for. So maybe it's a thing. Maybe I should aspire to this. And bearing in mind at that time, so when I was doing my applications, this is 2013, I didn't know anybody that looked like me that studied at those institutions. So naturally, it wasn't on my radar in terms of my mind. But that was definitely a turning point for me. And, I worked super hard, applied to the uni, more so to shut my parents up and to shut my teachers up so that I didn't have to look back and think, oh, what if? Not expecting to get an offer, not expecting to get in. Ended up getting an interview, was shocked, didn't tell a soul outside my family, apart from one teacher, and made him swear not to tell anyone. And then went to the interviews, came back very confused, thinking, what on earth was that? Because, the space, Oxford as a space is very different from East London. It's definitely not Hackney.
Yeah,
I'll tell you that.
East London. I'll give you that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So went to the interview, came back thinking, yeah, absolutely not. Just a story to tell the grandkids that, yeah, grandma got an interview at Oxford. You should take it a step further and get in.
And then ended up getting an offer, and it just completely blew my mind. And I ended up studying theology and religion at Pembroke College, Oxford, and spent 3 years there. It was great, very challenging at the same time, but yeah, that's pretty much my academic journey. Graduated in 2017, and here I am.
What was it like? So look, let's just dig into this a little bit. So you get to Oxford, and how many people look like you and have come from, you know, your part of town? I mean, it's just you, or I mean, what did it look like?
Yeah, I mean, so for those who don't know, Oxford and Cambridge and Durham, I think as well, are split out into colleges. They have a collegiate system. So you basically have like 40 different campuses of the university in the very small cities. So I was at Pembroke College. And what I do know at the time, this is in 2014, when I matriculated, I was the only Black person on my entire undergraduate degree. So across all 3 years, across the entire university, across every college, there were no other Black people, let alone Black, you know, women studying at that time, theology and religion. On my campus at Pembroke, I was the only Black person in my year group. There was one other guy at the time who unfortunately dropped out, you know, through to different challenges. So yeah, it was quite traumatic, to be honest, to navigate.
Did you have any, this is a question that Philip's asking in the chat, and or in the Q&A, and he says, we talk about imposter syndrome. Was there any of that? I mean,
big time.
Really?
Big time, big time. It was a huge thing for me, because I think there are a number of things that play into imposter syndrome. It's how you view yourself, and it's also how other people view the space that you're in. And the reason I say that is because prior to going to Oxford, when people started to realize that, oh, Esther's going to Oxford University, I started being fed with all sorts of negative narratives, like, oh, prepare yourself for this. There aren't going to be Black people. They're not going to have a support system for you. All sorts of things that just kind of geared up my anxieties towards the space. So, you know, what you hear from other people, I think, is a massive part in terms of how you feel when you enter into a space, and whether or not you feel like you're worthy of occupying a seat at that particular table. And I definitely found ways to deal with it. I think going into Oxford, you know, being the only Black person in sight on my college didn't help. I would say that for free. But, you know, they have a system where you have tutorials and it's one-on-one with your tutor. And bearing in mind, this is like the world leading expert in whichever subject that you are studying. So that is another thing. You feel very insignificant in front of people like that.
Yeah.
And but when we would have partner tutorials, so tutorials where, you know, there were other people involved, so like 2 students to 1 member of staff, or 3 students to 1 member of staff, and just listening into you know, the points raised by my peers, it's at points like that that I started to realize, actually, we are the same. You're saying the exact same, like, you're basically saying the cat sat on the mat, but in 50 words, and 50 words that nobody knows.
Yeah.
And when I came to these realizations, I was like, actually, hold on. I and my parents spent the equivalent of £0 and 0 pence on my education. I went to a state comprehensive school that, you know, my journey was not normal for them in any way, shape or form. And I've ended up in this space anyway, compared to people who maybe their parents have spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on their education, had all the resource that they needed, and they've ended up in the same spot. So who's the winner in that situation? Actually, it's me. So when I started to realize those things and come to these revelations, should I say, the space definitely became easier to navigate. But I, in all honesty, I don't think I ever got to the point where I was like, yeah, I've mastered navigating this space with full confidence.
Yeah. And so if you had to give some advice to someone who says, I really suffer from this imposter syndrome thing for whatever reason, and I think it's maybe a generational thing as well. I mean, look, I suffered it as well. We've all felt like we don't really kind of like belong. We're out of our depth, right? But I do think that maybe the millennial generation has it maybe more than most, and I don't quite know exactly why that is. But what would you say about, is it a generational thing, do you think? And if so, what advice would you give to someone who just says, look, I'm just riddled with it. I just feel it all the time. I just never quite feel like.
Yeah, I think there are a few angles to approach this. I don't think it's necessarily a generational thing, but I think in the current generations, it's probably harder to deal with, because there's so much hyper visibility and there's so much fakery out there as well. I mean, you scroll through social media and you're made to feel that if you're not a millionaire by the age of 24 and have your own house with the mortgage fully paid off, then you're a failure. Right. And I think that kind of thing, again, it feeds into this and makes people walk into rooms feeling insignificant. And, you know, I wouldn't even say half, the majority of it is fake. You know, a lot of people are portraying lives that just are not the case at all. And also, I think it's really important for us to come to the realization as individuals that we really are all in our own lanes, and we define success in the way that we choose to define success. To me, like I'm 25, I'm married, I'm settled, and I'm happy. To me, that is, Esther, you have achieved something worth clapping your hands for. And that's Esther's definition. That doesn't have to be Dawood's definition. It doesn't
It's
have
my definition. It's my definition, big time. I'm clapping my hands.
Well, exactly. So I think we all need to realize that we're all in our own lanes, and we really should live life on our own terms. But to your earlier point, I do think social media and just the hyper visibility of people's supposed lifestyles does make these things more difficult to deal with in a way that maybe my parents' generation didn't have to face when they were going through things.
No, I agree. Listen, I just want to talk a little bit about what happens after you leave at Oxford, right? So then you get an internship. Tell us a bit about that, and just a bit between leaving Oxford and kind of today. Just bring us up to speed.
Yeah, so I interned once whilst I was at Oxford. So I interned at Lloyds Banking Group, and it was great. I was actually I got awarded the Lloyds Banking Group Scholarship, where they basically subsidized some of my degree and then offered me an internship in the summer. So I grabbed that with full hands. And in all honesty, if I didn't get awarded that scholarship, I don't think I would have interned in the summer, purely from a perspective, purely because of ignorance. Because again, coming from the background that I came from, I didn't even know what an internship was until they told me, as part of the program, you do this thing called an internship that means you spend X amount of time with the firm. And I was like, okay, cool, yeah, that sounds like a good shout, I'll do it. But outside of that, it's really when I hit third year and everyone started talking about, all of these different firms and spring weeks and all sorts of different, new terminology that started springing up. I was like, oh snap, this really is a thing. Like, people are they're getting a step ahead from now. So yeah, I interned at Lloyds Banking Group. I think it was in 2016, in the summer of my second year, and that was great. It was kind of like my first introduction into finance, but not investment banking, which is what I inevitably ended up going into. This was retail banking, and very, very different.
Yeah.
Graduated in 2017, but rewind a little bit. In my second year in 2015, I launched a social enterprise called Open Palm, and again, it was birthed out of my frustrations of navigating Oxford as a space. Right? What
is it? So tell us about Open Palm. I'd love to hear a bit about that.
Yeah, so we went into state comprehensive schools, like my previous school, and primary schools as well, state comprehensive primary schools, and we worked with Black students, specifically mentoring them through the Oxford, Cambridge, and Russell Group application processes, and matching them with industry mentors as well. So very similar aims, to what we're doing here at 10,000 Black Interns, but it was much more focused on the progression from A-level to higher education. Because I think what I found post-graduation, or even, at university, just the surnames of some of the people that I was surrounded by, I was like, there seems to be some sort of link between your academic space and where you end up in the future. So, it was through that I kind of launched Open Palm. And post-graduation in 2017, I spent a year kind of building the team, expanding our functions and partnerships, and then decided to go into the city. I applied to a bunch of investment banks and management consultancy firms, and ended up getting an offer from Goldman Sachs in their investment banking division in structured equity derivatives. And that also was a very, very interesting experience for me, because I would say that my weaknesses are definitely more on the technical side. I don't enjoy maths. So it's funny that I ended up in the most technical.
Structured equity derivatives. I mean, yeah, okay. So that would have been a challenge. I see that.
Yeah. Super technical. So it was a very, very steep learning curve for me, but one that I enjoyed at the time. It was good to build upon what I thought my weaknesses were at that point in time, and to leave that space, which I did 2 years later, feeling like much more well-rounded in terms of my skill set.
Yeah, got it. Let me just jump in and let's talk a little bit about race for a second, because you made it, right? I mean, you talked about your background, you've talked about the school you went to, you've talked about working hard, you got into Oxford, you got your internship, you go to Lloyds, you then graduate, you get another internship, you go to Goldman. I mean, you kind of made it through, right? What do you think holds other people of Black heritage back from? Why are there not more people like Esther doing the same thing that you have done? What are the obstacles, would you say? Are there any obstacles? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, I mean, we could be here all day on this topic. I feel like there are so many different things that can play a part in the journey of Black people.
Yep.
I think if I rewind to my journey in a state comprehensive school, as we have all come to understand, these institutions are not equipped for people who necessarily have high aspirations academically. Whilst my school was extremely supportive of my application, kind of in general, particularly at the senior management levels, I remember conversations with individual teachers where they're trying to dissuade me from putting in the application, saying, "Oh, no, don't bother with that. You have to work really hard. People that look like you don't study there. People that speak like you don't study there. So, don't do that." And, I think sometimes teachers forget how instrumental their words are.
I'm just going to ask this question then. Were those teachers, were they white? Were they Black? Was it a mix?
They were white. They were white, actually. In terms of the example I have in my head, it was a white teacher. And
let's just unpack that for a second. And I mean, someone is going to say, is that racism, or is that just, they're just saying, look, what are they saying, do you think? I mean, what if you have to unpack where's that teacher coming from, insofar as you can tell?
Who knows? I mean, so far as I can tell, it could be anything from, internalized racism. It can be they don't see themselves in a space like that, therefore they project that onto the people that they teach.
No matter what color the person is.
No, yeah, exactly. No matter what color the person is. And I'm inclined to think it was more that than anything else, because the space that you're in is super, super important. If even from the teacher's perspective, they have not seen this thing happen.
Yes.
That's why visibility is so important. If teachers aren't seeing this thing happen, then they too are not planning that out as a possibility for their future students. Yeah. So, there are a number of things.
This is one thing. So that's one thing. The teachers themselves are kind of saying, look, I mean, you had one who's like, you should definitely do it. But then there are others who are like, this is probably not for you. And then what are the other factors you think that just are limiting and just hold people like you, equivalent to you back, do you think, from the journey that you were able to make?
Yeah, I think if I look at what could have potentially stopped me from doing particular things or making some of the decisions that I made, it would have been ignorance, like just not knowing or not having done my research correctly. Because even when I look at the way I applied to Oxford, it's so clear that I had no idea what I was doing, because they have, as I said, different colleges, and it's not something that I've looked into. So you can apply in two different ways. You can apply specifically to a college, and you can do an open application. Right. Now, I just did an open application, not because I felt that was the better route. I just didn't know that you could apply to a specific college, nor did I know the differences between the different colleges. Even when I look at the degree that I chose to study, I studied theology and religion, and I don't regret it. But I remember walking on campus and then just like speaking to some people and just finding out what they studied. And I'm hearing human sciences, theology and philosophy, all sorts of different subjects. And I was like, snap, I didn't know these were options. I should have done my research. Looking back, I don't regret the choice that I made, but I just think that's also another factor in play. Like, if you navigate this world purely on assumptions and the words of other people, you will 100% limit yourself. I think it's so important to self-educate and to look into options yourself and really expand your horizons through reading, through going to events, through asking the right people the right questions, because you can be in front of the right person, ask the wrong questions, and you're worse off than you were before. You can be in front of the wrong person, ask the right questions, and you're better off than you were before. So I think all
really see that. So here's a quick question for you. Is there a simple fix, or maybe something that could just make it easier, right? I mean, if these great universities or any of the universities were to had come to your school and had said, just over a weekend or on a Thursday afternoon, this is how the thing works, and we would love to have people like you come and study here with us. You've got to pass your grades, or you pass your exams and get the grades. But I mean, would that have helped? And what about if organizations had come to, the big banks or the advertising agencies or the search firms, had they come to your school on a Saturday and just said, this is who we are, this is what we do. If this is how you make your way from where you are into our, and there is a seat for you in our organization. Is that the kind of thing that maybe would have helped, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Because even going back to uni days, I mean, universities, they hold careers fairs and all of the above. And again, this is something that has definitely changed today. But I remember walking into careers fairs and seeing a room full of white people. And that gave me the impression that every firm that's apparently worth working for is full of people that don't look like me. Yep. So, I completely agree with you that visibility, again, is extremely important, and being able to see yourself and I'll address this in two ways. Being able to see yourself in a particular position makes a difference. But I also think there is value in being a bit revolutionary in some of your choices. Sometimes you won't see yourself in a certain position. Sometimes there won't be anybody that looks like you, but it doesn't mean that that's not an opportunity worth taking, because it takes somebody to be bold. And I get that not everybody is an activist, not everybody has their fist in the air, not everybody's ready to fight the good fight, and that's fair enough. But it's always worth considering, do I need to have somebody in this space that looks like me in order to penetrate?
Yeah. And look, what's interesting is that a lot of people are looking right now, even as we speak, right? Even as we're having this conversation, a lot of people are looking at the system and are saying, when you look at Oxford or you look at Cambridge, or you look at any of our bigger institutions and you don't see anyone who looks like you, right? You would be forgiven for thinking that the system is somehow racist, right? Let's use that word. But actually, and maybe there are people who do have racist, as you said, internalized racism. It's possible. But maybe a more benevolent, but still a dangerous setup is that the system, it wasn't built for people like you, right? So it just wasn't created for someone like you, going to the school you went to, even though you were bright and even though you were hungry and even though you were talented, somehow the system and the way the whole thing worked wasn't just put together with you in mind.
Yeah, I mean, there's absolute truth in that the systems of a number of countries were not built with certain demographics in mind. And I think, as a Black person navigating or having navigated the corporate world, the educational space, all of the above, I mean, of course there are systems that weren't built for my success, and it's not just Esther. This is every ethnic minority, but in particular, every Black person navigating these spaces. We face unique challenges when we occupy certain seats at the table that our white counterparts don't face, and that in itself is evidence to suggest that this wasn't built with us in mind, and there are certain barriers that still need to be broken in order to put us on equal footing with our white counterparts.
Yeah, I like to talk about the kinks in the hose pipe, right? The idea that water doesn't flow through the hose pipe, not because the tap's been turned off, but because there's a kink in the hose pipe, and then you unkink it and you realize there's still no water flowing. So you think, doesn't make any sense. How's that? And then you've got to unkink all the kinks. And of course, 10,000 Black interns is about unkinking one very particular kink, which is how do you get into UK PLC? That's just one very, very kinked part of the hose pipe. But of course, and we'll talk about this in a sec, but of course there are other kinks as well, right? Once you're in there, there's a kink about how you make it up to the very top, because that's an issue as well. Then there's also a kink when you were younger, right? When you were 12 and 13, exactly what you've been talking about in terms of teachers not really saying, maybe that's a bit too ambitious, or, for whatever reason, there's a kink at that part. And then there's also a kink when you're even younger of looking up and thinking, maybe my brothers have done that, so I can do that same thing. There's the whole role model piece, right?
Yeah, completely agree. And that's why 10,000 Black interns exists, right? We're addressing that specific kink where everybody recognizes the vast underrepresentation of Black people in industry. And the point of a program like this is that if we continue on in the way that we're going, there's absolutely no way that this won't pay fantastic dividends in industry in the future. And that's what we're all here for. And I'm just so proud as well of all of the interns that we have that have, driven through this program, been part of our inaugural kind of pilot, or, whatever you want to refer to it as. And, just having all of these people, we came into this thinking we'd have 100 interns going into investment management. We're close to 500 now. It's just ridiculous how quickly this has grown. And it's evidence to suggest that, one, this was needed, and two, hopefully will have the impact that's been intended and more.
Yeah, and this 500 is just for one sector. Let's remind everybody, right? This is asset management. We're actually now talking about 20 sectors where we're trying to get to 2,000, and we're going to do 2,000 a year for 5 years. But look, Esther, you are your program director, so you're running the show. Tell us a little bit, what is your day-to-day? What does that look like? And, you get up at whatever crazy hour in the morning, go to bed crazy hour at night, but in between, what are you doing? Just shine a little light on what your day looks like.
So I would say everything, to be honest, with regards to the execution of both of our programs. So 100 Black interns, and then of course 10,000 Black interns. So every day, like no day is the same, but I'll definitely say that my main focuses are the strategic drive of us as an organization and making sure that we're doing what we have said on the tin. You know, it's our name kind of puts us out there, and it's really important that because of what we are called and because of what we said we are here to do, we execute those things, and that is my responsibility. So it's liaising with our partner firms, in some cases liaising with our interns, with the partner, creating partnerships in industry to help drive our vision forward and to expand out the optionality that our interns have at the point of application, and just making sure that we also have all of the systems in place to scale in the way that we need to and have planned.
Yeah, because this doesn't happen like by accident. I mean, this is you think about how many firms we're dealing with. How many firms now are we talking about? Like well over 600, right? That we are.
Yeah, we're about 750 now.
Okay, 750 firms, and I mean, countless participants of candidates that we're having to sift through. We're having to get back to. Everybody's got a question, right? That needs answering. So what is your purpose? What drives you? Like, why are you, like you said, you're 25 years old. You could be doing whatever let's face it, you could be doing whatever you wanted to be doing, wherever you wanted to be doing it. And, you know, we're very fortunate to have you, Esther, but what drives you? Why are you doing this? And what's your sense of purpose around this whole thing?
Yeah, I'm really driven by social impact. Like, I'm really, really driven by that. I think in terms of the journey that I've taken on during university, what I did as kind of like my side piece was purely driven by social impact. I then went into investment banking and left in 2020, again, wanting to pursue something with more social impact. It's always been a drive of mine. And just in terms of what kind of pushes me, there's this particular, so my name is Esther, and I'm named after Esther in the Bible, right? And we all know the story. She was queen and she was married to King Xerxes, and the Jews were targeted. And there's this specific part of the story. It's in chapter 4, verse 14, where it's where her uncle Mordecai basically. Her uncle Mordecai says to her, "Who knows? Maybe you have been called to the kingdom for such a time as this." And that is like, it completely encapsulates what drives me. And what he was basically saying there is that, look, you're queen, you're Jewish, the Jews are under fire, and you think that just because you're sat in the king's palace that this isn't going to touch you. It is going to touch you, so you need to wake up and do something about it. And I think it's so well, it meshes so well into the process, into the premise of lifting as you climb, that just because you're in a particular position of privilege, don't forget those that are coming up behind you. Don't shut the door behind you. So I'm really driven by that concept of, you know, making sure that you're always cognizant of the fact that you're in a position not only for your own benefit, but for the benefit of other people, more so than your own benefit, in my view, to be honest.
I love that. And of course, Mordecai was Esther's uncle, but he was really her mentor and her guide, right? I mean, he was the person really, without Mordecai, you know, she would not have met with success. I mean, he's the one who basically says to her, "Now's your moment, go speak to the king," and so on, right? So mentoring is big, right? I mean, Esther is the heroine of the story, but behind the scenes, there's this mentor, this sponsor, this influencer. Have you had anyone like that in your life, and how important do you think mentorship is for someone watching this who maybe is a senior person in an organization and who's thinking, "I'd love to get involved in this. I love it. I love the idea. I love the concept. How can I get involved?" Talk a little bit about the power of being a Mordecai, of being a mentor, and just coming alongside the Esther, or, you know, whoever the person is, and just basically guiding them.
Yeah. I think it's hugely important. I can say without a shadow of a doubt that I would not be where I am today without the different mentors I have in my life. Absolutely. And there are a number of them, both in terms of my family and just the great family that I've been blessed with, really, that, you know, have helped me navigate through life. And then also outside of my family as well. I have a great mentor. His name is Tunji, actually. I'll give him a shout out. Tunji Akintoken. He is at PwC.
PwC, yeah. He's great.
And he is absolutely fantastic. He has really, nobody's an island, let me put it that way. Nobody's an island. And no matter how wise you think you are, there is always something really stupid that you are capable of doing. And sometimes it takes somebody whom you have respect for, who has gone, you know, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be someone you respect. Like, I think sometimes we have to get rid of our pride and listen to those who have gone a few steps ahead of us. Because they've seen things that we may not have seen. I'm not saying that, you know, there's a correlation between age and wisdom, but I definitely know that with the concept of someone having been further in their career than you are, there are certain things that they can tell you that you may not have your eyes open to yet.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, mentorship has been super important for me, and it's such a powerful construct because, and in both ways, because even when I look at my mentorship relationship with my different mentors, there are particular things that I have opened their eyes up to, or that they have been made aware of as a result of the relationship that we have. So it's, I think the best mentor-mentee relationships are mutually beneficial to both parties.
Yeah, completely. And look, you know, the power of a mentor, I always think, is that ability to inject confidence in the mentee and just say, Esther, you're amazing. You can do great things. You can go wherever you want to go. I mean, just hearing that from someone who's already further up the mountain and lifting as they climb, it's just so powerful, especially if you have an imposter syndrome. You're just like, I'm not so sure. And someone reaches down and says, you can make it. You are amazing, basically. You know, for me, you know, it was my parents, but, you know, my dad would always say to me, son, you know, you can be whoever you want to be. And his dad, by the way, had said it to him. Yeah. You know, when he was a young boy in his town in the middle of the Gold Coast in the early 30s, his dad used to say to him, you know, one day you're going to be a doctor, one day you're going to go to Harley Street. And my dad was like, what is a doctor? What is that? But his dad believed in him, and then my dad believed in me.
Yeah.
And it just goes down through the generations, that belief. And that's what Mordecai, he believes in Esther, right? And says it's for maybe such a time as this. So I'm loving having this conversation with you, Esther. Tell me a little bit about what you're, you know, we all have this vision, right? I'm one of the co-founders. There are four of us. We set this up, and, you know, we're looking at this and looking at a world that could be very different 5 years, 10 years from now, where it's normal to have people who look like us in positions of real influence. What do you think that could look like? I mean, what's your dream? When you just, you know, when you have your dream, I have a dream. When Esther has her dream, what does that look like?
So in terms of what industry looks like, it's walking into a room and not having that feeling of, oh snap, I'm the only one. That to me, when we get to a place, let me not say if, when we get to a place where as a Black woman, as a Black man, we can walk into the highest seats at the highest tables and know that the decision makers, amongst the decision makers, are people like us, or should I say us, that to me is a great place to be, because I think it's not enough to kind of have our fists in the air and say, we want change, we want change. Of course we want change, and of course we need change. But in order for that to happen, we can't rely on people who don't share our experiences to be able to empathize in every situation and to be able to make decisions with us in mind. It doesn't make sense. When I make my decisions in life, I'm not considering the fish in the sea. Do you know what I mean? It's not part of my day-to-day life. I mean, there's an argument to say that I should because of environment and all of the above, but you understand the point that I'm trying to make. So that to me would be a great position for us as a community, where we are occupying the decision seats, and we're not having to, you know, march on the streets demanding things that our great grandparents, our ancestors demanded for many years ago.
Esther, I love that. What do you think as a community we can be doing better? I think maybe this is one of the things that the report that came out, right? That was the commission that came out yesterday, whenever it was, that everybody's talking about. I think it's one of the things he was trying to get at, was that this is a very complicated discussion, right, around race and, you know, systemic racism and institutionalized racism, and is there, you know, does it exist, and et cetera. And, you know, and part of the conversation is around everybody playing their part. And if we as a community are to play our part, what do you think, let me ask you this question, what do you think we can do better, where we're not pointing at anybody else, we're just saying, look, this is something that this is how we get our house in order. What do you think we could do? I don't want to make suggestions, but, you know, put words in your mouth, but if you've got any thoughts around what we can, how can we make things better for ourselves?
Yeah, I think aside from the report, because I haven't had the chance to read it yet, but I've definitely been hearing the conversations surrounding it, which I think at the very least are interesting. As a community, if I use myself as an example, so in my home, my parents are very entrepreneurial, and they basically built from the ground up when they came from Nigeria to this country. And things were very tough growing up. but we're definitely reaping the reward of their hard work now.
Sure.
So one of the things that I would say is that from a community perspective, it's really important to have productive conversation around the table. And when I say productive conversation, I mean, we should share mechanisms of acquiring wealth, of furthering ourselves as a community. Because again, another thing that I became very, very aware of when I went to university is that a lot of my friends were having certain conversations about particular things with regards to business, entrepreneurialism, all of the above, from a very, very young age. And it kind of shocked me. When I'd go to some of my friends' houses and just listen to them around the table with their parents, it was literally a situation where their parents were training them up to be the heirs of their global company. And I was just thinking, wow, this is a thing. And not to say that, I didn't have that at home, or that, other members of the Black community don't have that. But I definitely think that it's something for us to put into very keen practice, because these things clearly make a difference.
Yeah, completely. Listen, well, you know what? We've got a few minutes left. I'm just going to grab a few questions. I'm just going to throw them at you. Let's do virtually one-word answers if we can. Why did you decide to leave Goldman Sachs from Aaron?
Yeah, so with Goldman, I went into that very strategically, into that opportunity very strategically. I knew that I wasn't a very technical person, and I wanted to build out my skill set specifically in that area. So for me, once I kind of came to the point where I thought, okay, I've developed to the point where, I'm much better than I was at this prior. As I said before, my focus was social impact. So I wanted to go into something where I could really exercise those muscles a bit more. So for me, 2 years was sufficient, really. And I decided to leave. And for other people, more than that is sufficient for them. And go ahead,
Absolutely.
Go and thrive.
Okay, another quick question here around what do you find most impressive in your peers? You've obviously now worked alongside some very impressive people your kind of age, in organizations. What stands out for you if you're looking across, the desk next door, that person's impressive? What sort of pick 2 or 3?
I think the people that I find the most impressive definitely have a lot of integrity. They do what they say they are going to do. And I just really value that in somebody, because in the world of work, it's difficult it can be difficult to put trust in employees. And when somebody shows you that they are a person of integrity, I think that goes a very long way.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. Okay, I am going to, did you make any lifelong friends at Oxford?
Oh yeah, of course. And that's another thing. Going to Oxford really opened my mind up, because I went there very guarded and came out befriending, a 12th generation Etonian whose parents own a multi-billion dollar company. And I never thought that would be the case. I thought I wouldn't like people like that, but he's just like me. And we're great friends.
Love it. So tell me a little bit now, if you were just to sum up some advice to those who are watching, and I just would love to emulate your achievement and be where you are when they get to the same point. What advice would you give them if you were giving advice to your younger self, age 2021, where everybody is now, right, about to embark on an intern, how to impress, how to just go out there and from the get-go, just basically knock the ball out of the park? Just sum it up for us.
Yeah, so I would say start at a point where you're making decisions for you. And I come at that specifically because I know the kind of community we come from. Our parents can be very instrumental in the decisions that we make. So one thing I would say is make decisions for you. But once you're in these internships, I would just show up ready. And when I say show up ready, be that person that is asking questions. Be that person that shows that this is actually something of interest. You're not just here for the CV points. You're actually here to soak up the life out of it. Like, think about, for those who eat seafood, think about the way you eat a crab leg. You are sucking the life out of it to try and get all of the meat from inside the bones. And I think that should be the approach when heading into these internships. Suck the life out of it, and leverage your connections as well. Even if it doesn't end up rolling into a full-time offer, or it doesn't quite work out in the way that you wanted, or the experience went in a different way to your expectations. They could be, if you play your cards right, lifelong connections. And it may be a situation where you don't end up building a career in investment management, but it's elsewhere. But there's someone you met along the way or at that firm who was able to plug you in with a different connection or plug you in with a different opportunity. And I can't stress enough how much first impressions and lasting impressions matter, because that will then dictate, in some ways, the opportunities that you have moving forward. Because if you are liked, certain conversations are much easier to have. I'll put it that way.
There's, yeah, no doubt about it. And I think one of the things, as I'm listening to you, what I'm hearing is you need integrity, all the things you've talked about, but you also need courage, right? Courage is important. And I'm going to end now because we are quarter to the hour and we like to wrap on time. But if there's one thing that you've got, it's clearly courage. You had the courage when nobody else was applying. You applied to Oxford when one of your teachers said, I really wouldn't do it. You still had the courage to do it. You went there, even though you were the only person who looked like you. You applied for this job, you got it. I mean, you have a lot of courage, right? And I'm going to end by reading from that verse that you called out, Esther 4:14, right? Where Mordecai talks about courage. And he says this, he says, you need to talk, because he says, you need to do what you need to say, because he says, for if you remain silent, i.e. you don't have courage, relief and deliverance for the Jewish people will arise from another place. You and your father's family will perish. Then here's the big question. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. So Esther, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a real privilege, a pleasure. Love talking to you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Put your comments into the comments if you want to. Maybe see you next week. I hope. I think we're not sure we're doing it on Tuesday. We might roll it from Tuesday because we got something else on, but we will see you again. And listen, these 10,000 hours are coming together, ticking by, and you guys are all going to do amazing, amazing, amazing things. Esther, thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye.